So every once in a great while, this happens like once every other year, and it lasts for about 2 weeks. But I get on this big weightlifting kick. So I'll go to the gym and I'll start pumping some iron. And I think the last time I was there was this happened. It was probably back, I'm gonna say 2010, somewhere in there. I still pay the membership every month to support the local businesses, but just don't get as much use out of it as I want to. But there's good reasons for that. I'm not going to bore you what they are, like laziness and gluttony and all that sort of stuff. But so I was on the hip sled, and this is the one where you kind of like lay down, so it's like the floor, and I'm on my back, and you lift the weight up and these are your strongest muscles in your body, like your buttocks and your hamstrings and your thighs or whatever. So I had like 2 plates on both sides, so you had 45, 90 pounds on each side, so 180 pounds total. I'm feeling pretty good about myself at this point. I mean, my legs were very fresh. They were able to lift a lot of weight at this time, and I did it like 12 times, and I got up, stretching out and getting ready to go to the next machine. So this woman was waiting to get on the machine behind me, and I was like, I'll take some of these weights off for her, and here's what she said to me. She said, oh, you can just leave those on there. And then she goes and she gets 2 more plates and puts them on each side. So she's lifting 360 pounds. And it was at the gym that day that God taught me about humility. So, I worked on this a lot this week, and a little confession to make. This is not something I have figured out. Humility, pride, comparison. I'm not going to stand to you as a person today that says, this is how you do it. This is what works for me. I mean, this is, it's the good, the bad, the ugly. It's, researching what God has to say about the subject, whether philosophers and theologians have said about the subject. But I really think that this is it's a really real issue for a lot of us. The self-esteem, a lot of us deal with those types of issues. We do deal with pride. We deal with the lack of humility. We do have this comparison thing that, we'll compare ourselves to other people, whether they're inferior or superior to us, whatever either of those words may mean. And I think it's really important to, look at the word itself, humility. Now, when I say this word, some of us right away, we really like this word, and we embrace what it stands for. And this is a virtue that we strive for. Now, if I would say humility to a group of other people, here we may get that, we fear it or we interpret it like, we have this lack of self-confidence or we're timid. So I think it's very essential for us before we can get started to really look at what humility is and what it's not. Now, the French word, where we get our English word, humility, the old French word from the 1400s, it actually means sweetness. Now, if I were to ask all of you, before the service to describe humility in one word, I'm not sure if the word sweetness would have come out of anybody's mouth. The Latin word is a very good translation. It's egolessness. So what it means is we're willing to put our ego aside. Now, I think the Norwegian word is a very good translation. What Norwegians understand humility to be is not believing that you're superior or inferior to others. Now, before we take communion, on most Sundays when we take communion, I'll say something like this. We are all brothers and sisters to Christ. We are all children of God. And really, once we can embrace that, that's the foundation that really lays the groundwork, for what humility looks like in our life. That we're not superior necessarily. We're not inferior. We're just different, from other people. And when we can embrace those differences and accept us for who we are and who we're not, accept others for who they are and who they're not, then humility can happen. Now, if you just hear one sentence, I'm going to say the sentence a number of times this morning, but if you just hear one sentence, here is the gist of what I'm talking about this morning. Now, Jesus knew that to become great, a person has to stand with other people and not above them. True greatness is not for those who are above everybody else. True greatness is for those who are willing to stand beside other people and hold their hands and bear their burdens and do life with them in a way that's real and authentic and relevant. Now, last week, let's go to this verse first. I want to go to Matthew chapter 20, verse 28. Jesus is speaking here, and he says, even the Son of Man, he's talking about himself here, even the Son of Man did not come to be served. Okay, so Jesus says, I did not come to be served, but I came to serve others and to give my life as a ransom for many. So last week, we're starting the series last week. We started the series last week, Who is this man? And we got our first picture of who Jesus was. Jesus as acceptor. Jesus as accepting. So one of the verses we looked at last week, we looked at the story of Zacchaeus and how Zacchaeus was not acceptable to himself, how other people did not accept Zacchaeus, but Jesus still accepted him, both for who he was and who he wasn't. He saw the past, but he also saw the possibilities, and he saw the possibilities is greater than the past. Now, at the end of that text, what Jesus said was the Son of Man came to seek and to save. The reason that Jesus came was to seek and to save. Now, we get a little bit bigger picture, and we also get a little bit more focused picture this week. So last week was accepting, and Jesus came to seek and to save. This week is humble. And what Jesus came to do is to serve. So as we come to recreate ourselves, have God recreate us more to be like Christ, we have these three S's now. We can seek, we can save, and we can serve. Now I want to tell you a story, and this is from the Gospel of John. It's the only place in the Bible that this story appears. And this is a story just probably about 36 to 48 hours before Jesus would actually die. So what I want you to think about is, if you were in perfectly good health, and you knew you were going to die in the next 36 to 48 hours, what would you do with those remaining 36 to 48 hours? Probably like Jesus, what you would do is you would spend that time with the people that you love the most. Now, I would say that Jesus, he shows no partiality, that he loves all equally. But he had these 12 disciples, and he was getting ready to have dinner with these 12 disciples, where he's probably going to teach them his best stuff one more time. It's like, I'm getting you guys ready for the final exam here, and we're going to review all this stuff one more time. So the first thing that Jesus did was when Peter got there, it's important to know the cultural habits of 2,000 years ago versus today. So Peter would have had to walk through a dry dirt road to get to this house. Peter's upper body was probably most likely clean, but his feet would have been absolutely filthy. They would have been sweaty. We could use the word nasty. Personally, I don't have a high affinity toward other people's feet, and I doubt that many of you do either. It's kind of a part of the body that we try to stay away from. And Jesus, he takes a towel on his arm, and he looks at Peter, and he has this basin of water, and he says, you know what, Peter? I'm going to show you the ultimate form of hospitality here. I'm going to wash your feet. That was, back in the day, it was considered the highest form of flattery, the highest form of service. And we can just get a glimpse of that from our culture today. But you know what Peter said? Peter's like, Jesus, you're not washing my feet. I should be the one who's washing your feet. And Jesus says, Peter, I'm going to wash your feet. So he gets down on one knee. He has a towel. He has a basin of water. He takes his sandals off. And then Jesus washed Peter's feet. Now, let's put this back into context. Jesus has only got 48 hours left to live at this point in his life. He's trying to teach the disciples some of life's most important lessons, and instead of telling him, he's doing something even more powerful. He is showing them. He is showing them what it means to be a true servant, because Jesus believes that true greatness is not when we're above others, it's beside others and even below others. Jesus was showing Peter what it meant to be a true servant. Now, I would say that, this is a metaphor. I don't think God's going to call us to, practically wash people's feet, but think about people in your life. People that you can serve. What is it going to look like for you, to wash the foot of another person? How can you radically, how can we, proactively go out and seek people like this, that we can really show them what it means to be humble, and that we can experience for ourselves what it means to be humble. Now listen to what Jesus says. Jesus concludes this text, the foot washing narrative, in verse 14. This is from John chapter 13. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet. And he's looking Peter right in the eye when he says this. Now that I've washed your feet, you should also wash another's feet. What Jesus was teaching here is that humility in life is going to be essential. He could say, it's the exalted will be humbled and the humble will be exalted. They've heard that a number of times. Jesus is saying, I got one last chance, to teach these people this lesson, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show them what it means to be a humble servant. Now I want to talk about a book for a little bit. It's called Good to Great. It was written in the year 2001 by an author whose name is Jim Collins. Now this is a business book. This book has spent dozens of weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. This book today is still used in MBA programs. Businesses will use it to train people to develop strategies. Now what Jim Collins did, remember the title of the book is Good to Great. What he did is they looked at 1,435 companies over a 40-year period, so they had to backdate this and do research that had already happened. And what they did is they looked at these good companies, 1,435 of them, and then they took 11 companies out of these 1,435 companies that made the jump from good to great. Now what that meant for them is that they outperformed all the other companies, comparable companies in their field, by 3 times consistently over a 15-year period. Now I want to take a little pause, just real quick, and I'll get back to this. Who in here right now wants to go from good to great in your life? Most of us do. Even some of you raise your hands. We're not even a charismatic church, and you're saying, praise the Lord, that's me. Some of us want to go from pretty good to very good. Some of us want to go from pathetic to not so pathetic. Wherever we are, we want to improve, don't we? We don't want to remain the same. We don't want to regress. We want to move forward. So this actually has implications for you as a person going from good to great. Now what they did is they looked at these 11 companies that were able to make the jump from good to great. And they only found 2 similarities in the cultures of all these companies. One similarity was that the 11 good to great companies were able to create both an atmosphere of creativity and discipline. Now they had many companies that could just either have creativity. They had very many companies that had a culture of discipline. But these 11 companies all fostered and had both an atmosphere of creativity and discipline. Now that has nothing to do with this morning's sermon. It's just kind of a bonus. The second one does have everything to do with this morning's sermon. And it was a big surprise. The first one was not a surprise to anybody. It makes sense. I said it. It makes sense to you. The second thing, though, is that all 11 CEOs of these companies had very long tenures, but they also had this paradoxical mix of extreme professional will coupled with what the researchers called an intense personal humility. Now that surprised them. They didn't think that these 11 good to great companies would have humble people at the top. So they did a little bit of digging, and it started to make a lot of sense to them. What these people did is they created an atmosphere of superb results, but they never took the credit for themselves. They passed it on to other people. The success of the organization was more important than their need for the ego to be boosted. So one of the companies was a company called Hewlett-Packard. I know we have a Hewlett-Packard employee here this morning, probably a few of them. Did you know it was in the book?
I read it.
Yeah, so he read in the end. You didn't know it was in the book, though, but he read the book. We're friends. Are we still friends? I care what you think of me, Rick. Okay, so David Packard is the co-founder of Hewlett-Packard. Now, in Jim Collins' words, he described himself as an HP man first and a CEO second. He was a man of the people. What he did is management by walking around. What he did is he shunned publicity. Now, he's quoted in saying this, and I wrote it down. You shouldn't gloat about anything you've done. Instead, you ought to keep going and find something better to do. So you can see why having a leader with humility is going to be important here. He didn't gloat about what has already been done. He was too busy, finding out what the next thing was that his company could do. Now, Patrick Daniel, who's CEO of the North American energy company Enbridge, I don't think any of you probably work for them, so you may not have heard of him. He was able to turn the focus away from himself and continually recognize the contribution of others. The researcher said, this is what this man does the best. He recognizes and he gives all the credit to his vice presidents, to the middle managers, to the people on the floor that do all the work. Now, this was a jump from good to great. Personal humility made this happen. Now, you can see that personal humility has nothing to do with being meek. Personal humility has nothing to do with being timid. On the contrary, personal humility here can become a source of strength. Now, humility, what it is, it's a lack of personal arrogance, but it's not a lack of aggressiveness to achieve something that we want to achieve. Now, think about one of the examples this way. Like, say if you're trying to make the jump from good to great in your life, or say in this case, the corporation was trying to make the jump from good to great. Eventually, the CEO would have to say, this one's a little bit beyond what I can do. I'm going to have to bring some help in here. Now, that is what humility says. Now, pride says something like this. I'm in charge here. We're going to do this thing my way, and even if we have to make a few mistakes, I'm the boss, and there's pride here. Now, you can see that those companies aren't going to move from good to great, are they? So think about this in your own personal life. Think about this in our lives. There's going to be times when we're stumped. There's going to be times when we just don't know what the next step is. There's going to be times when we're lost or we're just not sure. What pride says is I can figure this out myself. I've gotten me to this place, and I can get me to the next place. What humility says is I've got to find somebody. I've got to find someone who can teach me. I've got to find someone who can mentor me. I've got to find somebody who can take this journey with me. So we can see the road from good to great, the road from pretty good to really good. It begins with humility, doesn't it? Another mark of a humble leader is the way they treat other people. Now, we found that I wasn't part of the research team. They found that the leaders would give the credit to the other people. They would respect all people. Now, think about this. In your life, just think about your experience with other people. Now, I want you to think about that person that does not respect other people. What's your reaction to that person? It's probably not overly positive, is it? But then think of a person that accepts and respects people regardless of what color they are, regardless of what political party they belong to, regardless of what kind of house they live in, regardless of what kind of job that they have. Now think about what you think about that person for a little bit. And I'll tell you what, that the person who respects is generally going to be the person who is respected. The way that we treat people is generally going to be thrown right back at us. We offer out respect and humility. That humbleness and that respect is probably going to come back our way. Now, Jesus knew what research confirmed, that to become great, or to be truly great, one has to stand with people, not above them. So let's talk about pride for a little bit. Pride is the opposite of humility. Now, in my column this morning, if you can read my scribblings, I talked about the differences between pride and humility, and I want to flush a few of those out right now because these are so important. Now, what pride is unthankful. Pride says, I deserve this. Pride says that I don't need to be grateful. Now, what humility is very thankful, and humility is very grateful. Now, which type of person would you rather hang out with? Would you rather hang out with the person that is very grateful and very thankful, or the person that's ungrateful and unthankful? 100 out of 100 of us. We want to hang out with the thankful person. This goes back about 15 years ago. I was a youth minister in Atlanta, Georgia, when I was in graduate school. And there's 4 or 5 of us that went out to eat, usually after our youth ministry thing, and we kind of talk about how the night went. And on this night, we went to a Waffle House. Anybody ever been into a Waffle House? Praise the Lord. They make those hash browns, and they smother them with eggs and bacon and jalapenos and cheese, and you can get all this cholesterol for like $4.48. And never mind, I've lost my train of thought. My mouth is seriously watering right now. So anyway, this woman she was overworked, she was overextended. There was just like 2 waitresses there, and she actually messed up our order a little bit. We didn't say anything because, you get enough hash browns, enough eggs, enough bacon, just mix it all together, it's cool. But this other guy just, not from our church, thankfully, but just totally belittled her in front of everybody. It was just like, if you've been to the Waffle House, there's like a big bar and there's a table, and a Waffle House is seriously about the size of this stage. It's not that much bigger, and everybody could hear everything. And He left. He didn't give her a tip. This woman was almost reduced to tears. Now, one of the guys that I was with, he wasn't much older than me. He was probably in his mid to late 20s at the time. And I saw what he did. Nobody else saw this. But our check, thankfully it was his turn to pay because he did this. And our check was about $35, maybe for 4 or 5 of us or something like that. He took a $100 bill out of his wallet. He folded up the check over the top of it. He gave it to her, and he said, "You can keep the change." And after we got done, I said, that was a nice little tip you gave her. You should come to my restaurant sometime. And he looked at me and he says, she needed that encouragement a whole lot more than I needed that $100. Think about that. Pride is ungrateful. Humility is very grateful. Pride is angry. Humility is patient. If you had the choice between hanging out with the angry person or the patient person, again, 100 out of 100 of us, choose the patience. Pride monopolizes conversations. Humility actually listens. Humility says, I'm interested in you because you mean a lot to me. In fact, I don't think of myself really much better or worse than you, and you mean something to me, and I want to hear your story. So humility listens. Have you ever been in one of those conversations where you can't say anything? It's not much fun, is it? But what about when someone's listened to you, when you really need someone to listen to you? You can see the benefits of humility there, can't you? The prideful person isn't teachable. So it's really tough for the person with a lot of pride to learn because they're not exceptionally teachable because they already know everything. Humility is eager to learn from others. It's kind of like this. Say if a woman has a set of encyclopedias in the household and she puts them on Craigslist and she says something like this, set of encyclopedias for sale no longer needed at our house because my husband already knows everything. I heard more women laughing than men. Could have been the other way around. I have lost my place again. I had a point. Okay, so in Matthew 11:29, Jesus says, and we're very familiar with Matthew 28. I talk about that verse a lot because it's so important to us. Jesus says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." But listen to what Jesus says next in Matthew 11:29. "Let me teach you." Okay, so we're teachable here. "Let me teach you because I am humble at heart. I'm humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your soul." So here, we get this picture of Jesus that he's humble. And that if we come to him, he will teach us, and he will give us rest for our souls. We all need rest for our souls. Jesus will give us this, but we have to come as people who are teachable. We have to come with some level of humility. Another one I was thinking, I just wrote this one down this morning. A prideful person earns merit. Now, this is our 21st century American culture. We earn things. So a prideful person earns merit. The humble person can receive grace. Grace is nothing that we can earn. We can only receive it. And to receive it, there has to be some humility that exists in our life. I want to read a couple Bible verses. The first one is from Luke chapter 18, verse 14. This is Jesus speaking. He says, "I tell you the sinner." Okay, so Jesus said, "I tell you the sinner, not the Pharisee." The Pharisee here in this case is going to try to earn God's love. The Pharisee is going to try to keep the 10 Commandments. The Pharisee is going to try to keep all the Mosaic rules. So I tell you, the sinner, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. The way that we receive grace is simply through humility. We cannot earn it. James chapter 4, God gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will lift you up. The most concise teaching is from the Old Testament. It's from Proverbs chapter 3, verse 34. It says, "God mocks proud mockers, but gives grace to those who are humble." Pride is not the way to earn God's grace. Humility says, I'm broken, I'm messed up, but there's a God who is bigger than my mistakes. There's a God who is bigger than my problems. Now, listen to this. Pride is the opposite of humility. And I believe that comparison is the enemy of humility. Pride is the opposite of humility. Comparison, then, is the enemy of humility. Now, the Norwegian word for humility, or not humility, humility. I don't even know what the Norwegian word for humility is. They don't have much of it there. It's ydmykhet. And now what this word means, we've already talked about it. It means that we don't see ourselves as superior, but we don't see ourselves as inferior to other people. We see ourselves as pretty much in the same boat as everybody else. We're children of God, brothers and sisters in Christ. Now listen to this. Comparison, what it means is that we're either better than somebody else or we're worse than someone else. So you can see that comparison then becomes the enemy of humility. We can look at someone and we can say, I'm younger than that person. We can look at someone and say, I'm not as rich as that person. We can look and say, my job isn't as good as theirs. We can say that my kids are better behaved than theirs. So there's always this comparison that goes on. And true humility doesn't make comparisons. True humility says that we're pretty much the same as everybody else. Now, Ernest Hemingway, he says, there is nothing noble in being superior to your fellow man. True humility means that we are superior to our former self. So we don't compare ourselves against others. We compare ourselves as to who we used to be. And we are becoming this person that we weren't before, so that is progress. Even though we may not measure up to the neighbor, even though we may not measure up to the boss, we're making progress. Mark Twain says that comparison is the death of joy. When we compare ourselves to others, that's then the death of joy. And I want you to think about this one. The moment we stop comparing ourselves to our current place in life, and how we compare with the lives of others and maybe this place that we wish we were, is the very same moment when we can enjoy the present. But we can't do it until then. We can't enjoy what is right in front of us if we're always daydreaming about this utopian world that we don't live in, if we're always comparing ourselves to someone who may be better or worse than us. Now, this is not new. This is not an American thing that we deal with in the year 2013. We find this in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 18. About the same time, the disciples came to Jesus. So, again, this is near the end of Jesus' life. It's not as close as the foot-washing narrative, but there's not a lot of time left here for Jesus. Jesus has spent a couple years with these people at this point. These are the 12 disciples that should have gotten it by now, and listen to what they say. About that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Which one of us, 12, is the best, Jesus? That's what we want to know. So you know what Jesus did? This is good. Jesus calls a little child to him. It's like, when we read this in the Greek, this is like a 2 or 3 year old. He calls a little child to him, and he put the child among them. And then he says, I tell you the truth, unless you, the 12, turn from your sins and become like little children, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. So anyone who becomes humble as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Have you ever watched a bunch of like 2 or 3 year olds play before? They kind of got things figured out, don't they? They don't care yet about the skin color of the people that they're playing with. They don't care what neighborhood they live in. I'm not even sure if they're totally concerned about gender at that point. It gives us a glimpse of what true humility might look like. Not thinking any better or worse of other people than we think of ourselves. True humility is like a tree. What it does is it offers shade to the one who plants it. It offers shade to the weary traveler, and it offers the same shade to the one who seeks to cut it down. It shows absolutely no partiality. To become great, one must stand with people, not above them. But we've lost this somewhere, haven't we? We've got this pecking order, and we've got these comparisons that we make, and we've lost the innocence of the life that God wants us to live. If you've been coming here for more than 7 days, you know that I have 2 children. There's a 6-year-old David who's a kindergarten student, and there's Benjamin who's 11, and he's a 6th grader. So I picked David up a while back, and he was I could tell something was wrong. He's always happy to see me, and he was just kind of bent out of shape. And I said, so what's wrong, David? And I'm not telling. I said, no, what happened? And he says, well, there's this 3rd grader that calls me David Ficklefart. I said, he calls you David Ficklefart? And I said, that's actually a pretty good name. It's I've been called Finn Smell, Finn Stink, Flintstone, but never Ficklefart before. So, we went home, and me and him and Benny talked about it, and Benjamin said, "So, Dad, do you want to take care of this, or do I have to?" I said, "There's nobody taking care of a third grader. Just chill out. He's got a short memory. He never sees the kid. Just don't worry about it." So, like the next day, I totally forgot about this exchange. I picked Benjamin up at 3 o'clock, David at 3:45. Benjamin never wants to go get David. This day he did. Didn't even think about it. So, the worst 120 drivers in Omaha all have their kid go to Willowdale Elementary. Now, if your kid goes to Willowdale, you're not one of those 120, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. I've spent more time in that parking lot than in my office on most days. And, so I was sitting there, and Benjamin said he's going to go get David, which, again, is odd, but I wasn't even thinking about it. So now I see him talking to some kid that looks like he's about a third grader. I said, "Oh, I know what he's doing." So I said to Benjamin, I said, "Well, what were you talking to, or who were you talking to?" And he says, "Well, this kid that calls David Ficklefart." I said, "Well, what did you say?" And he says, "Well, I introduced myself as Benjamin Finistad, David's older brother." I said, "There's only one person that's authorized to pick on him, and it's not you." So I said, "What do you say after that?" And he said, "Well, I gave him a lesson in Norwegian. I taught him how to pronounce Finistad." I said, "It's Finistad, it's not Ficklefart." I said, "Well, what did he say?" And he said, "Okay." I said, "Well, what did you say?" And he said, "Well, the next lesson is not Norwegian. If you mispronounce it one more time, the next class is physical education." And David was like, "Yeah, and he's not going to be calling me David Ficklefart anymore." Now, I actually have a point to that story, other than your amusement. And a lot of us, I think, at times will kind of be like that third grader. We can compare ourselves to the kindergarten, and we feel pretty good, don't we? Maybe there's someone that's had a failure. Maybe there's someone that we've just kind of passed up on the totem pole, and all of a sudden we feel pretty good. Then all of a sudden the sixth grader comes around. I'm like, "Oh, man." I compare myself to her, and look how good she looks, and the clothes she wears, and look at that guy. He's got that great job, and everything just seems to be perfect for him. And that is a terrible, terrible way to live, isn't it? Always basing our worth upon the perceived value of other people. It's kind of like this. If we cannot get past this in our life, here's what your life is going to look like. It's like going back to the gym and getting on the treadmill. And you start off and you start walking, let's just say at 3 miles an hour. Now all of a sudden some little kid has come next to you and he's going 4.5 miles an hour. You think, there's no kid that's going to be walking faster than me, so you crank it up to 5 miles an hour. Now some other guy comes, so you can tell it's his first time in the gym in like 2 years. He has that look to him. And then all of a sudden he's going 6 miles an hour. You say, "Well, I got to go 6.5. Then there's a woman that gets on next to you and she says, "I can't go slower than her. I'm going to crank this thing up to 8 miles an hour." All of a sudden we're working too hard and we're going absolutely nowhere. I don't know if he's here this morning. We have a guy in our church that ran a 10K on a treadmill like last week. And he ran this 6.21 miles in 33 minutes and 20 seconds. That's 11.7 miles an hour for 33 minutes. Now, you can't run that fast. And that's the point, is that there's always going to be someone better than us that we can compare ourselves to that will make us feel inferior, and this is not God's plan for your life. God's plan is not to compare yourself with other people. God's plan is for us to compare ourselves with where we used to be. God's plan for us is to have His grace inspire us to become people that we have not yet been able to come before. What humility will do is it will restore our humanity. Comparing ourselves to other people, what it will do is one chip at a time, just like a sculptor with a piece of rock, one chip at a time, it will chip away at the very fabric, at the very person that God has created us to be. Humility in this case restores our community. I deal with this. I'll be honest. I have a friend that he's a good friend of mine, one of my best friends, and he's a pastor in another state. And he started a couple years before us, but his church has about 1,500 people. On a Sunday morning, and he's written a book. He's published. You can go to Amazon.com and buy it. He's one of those guys that gets to go speak at conferences. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll compare myself to him, and then all of a sudden I don't feel all that good about myself. And this is something I pray about. It's something that I think we all deal with. My prayer is, Lord, let me be more faithful in serving than I was yesterday. Let me be deeper in my relationship with you than I was yesterday. Lord, let me love and serve others more than I was able to yesterday. And when we can make that shift, When we can make that shift to who we were instead of who others are, then God's grace is able to do something in our life. It is only there. You want to know how to be humble. There's only one way. Humility will only happen when the indwelling of Christ happens in our life. God has created the world out of nothing, and only when we can become nothing will God create something new in us. Martin Luther, he said that, and what we do then is we pray for it. We keep seeking it. It means that we may have to give up certain things, but that's just as well, because when there's death, we also have a God who specializes in resurrection. Now, true humility, it's like a river. The deeper the river goes, the less we are going to hear, but the more powerful it becomes. And I believe that in all of us, that God is making our river just a little bit deeper. I believe that we're putting our pride aside, and that God is creating a masterpiece out of us so that our humility can show through and that we can be blessed by it and we can be a blessing to others. So let's pray. Lord.